They branded the blind pup cursed. The Omega took the beatings without a sound. The wind howled across the capital, a bitter gust carrying the scent of smoke and damp stone. Cobblestones gleamed wet under the moonlight, and shadows moved like living things along the walls of the castle. In the center of the courtyard, a figure knelt, his head bowed. His hands rested on the ground, fingers curled into the cold earth, yet he did not flinch, though his body trembled with cold and exhaustion. Arinder was blind. His eyes, pale as mist, reflected no light, and yet he seemed to see more than most men. He could feel the fear in the guard steps, hear the hesitation in the whispers of nobles, and sense the weight of destiny pressing down on him like a hand of iron. Tonight he was branded. The crowd had gathered early, a mix of nobles, soldiers, and curious villagers. Their faces were masked in shadow and candlelight, some sneering, some merely indifferent. The king had issued the decree: those who were cursed must show the mark. Those who bore it would carry shame, pain, and the reminder of their fate forever. And Arendor, the blind Omega, was chosen. A man stepped forward carrying the branding iron. Its tip glowed faint red, an ember that hissed as it met the cool night air. The heat seemed to whisper, promising agony, humiliation, and permanent memory. Yet Arendor knelt still, silent, unyielding. "Blind pup," the official called, voice sharp and cruel, "you have borne the curse of the old forest. Tonight the kingdom will see it upon you." Arendor did not answer. No tremor escaped his lips. His head stayed bowed, chin nearly touching the stone beneath him. Some in the crowd whispered of his bravery, others of stubbornness. None knew that his silence was both shield and dagger. He had learned long ago that sound betrayed weakness.
A silent man, even blind, could hold more power than 1,000 shouting soldiers.
The branding iron touched his shoulder. A hiss echoed across the courtyard. Gasps followed. Yet Arendor did not cry out. His breath remained steady, though the heat seared through his skin, leaving a trail of fire and pain that might have made a lesser man scream. He focused instead on the rhythm of the guard's footsteps and the shadows flickering across the walls. He imagined the pain like water flowing over rocks, sharp, cold, and relentless, but not enough to drown him. From the crowd a presence shifted. Kalen, lord of the northern hold, watched with an expression unreadable and yet full of tension. He was tall, with broad shoulders and hair like night, falling in waves that caught the firelight. His eyes, sharp and gray as storm clouds, followed every movement of the Omega with a mixture of curiosity and frustration. Kalen was known for his cruelty, for a temper that could shatter walls and hearts alike. Yet something about Arendor's stillness pulled at him, a silent defiance that intrigued even him. "Do you feel nothing?" Kalen whispered almost to himself, though the wind might have carried the words further than he intended. The crowd noticed nothing. The king's decree had left them with anticipation and fear. But Kalen's interest was not the same as theirs. He did not care for the ritual itself. He cared for the man kneeling under the glowing iron. Arendor's back arched slightly under the heat, a whisper of pain that only he could measure. He could smell the smoke and feel the searing mark burning into his flesh. But he did not yield. To yield was to give them victory, to give the world power over his soul. When the iron was finally lifted, the crowd erupted in murmurs. Some cheered, some shivered. Arendor remained kneeling, head bowed, his shoulders smoldering but his spirit unbroken. Kalen moved closer, stepping into the open where the firelight caught the edges of his armor. "Rise," he said, voice low but commanding. Arendor's knees scraped the stone as he rose slowly. Though his eyes could see nothing, he sensed the force of Kalen's presence, a shadow pressing against him, questioning him, testing him. "You carry the mark now," Kalen said. His voice was sharp, but there was a strange undertone. Curiosity, maybe even respect. "Do you know what that means?" Arendor's lips parted slightly. He answered calmly without fear. "It means I endure. It does not define me." Few had expected words from the blind Omega. Most had assumed that pain would break him. And perhaps Kalen too had expected submission, silence, or even tears. But instead, There was strength, quiet, and unyielding. Kalen's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in intrigue. "Interesting," he murmured. "Very interesting indeed." The guards behind him shifted uneasily. Kalen did not often speak in riddles or curiosity. He commanded obedience, not fascination. But Arindor's presence, even as a marked Omega, challenged that instinct. "Follow me," Kalen said finally, not a command but a decision that carried weight. He turned toward the castle gates, his cape trailing like a shadow across the stones. Arindor hesitated. His life had been a series of orders, punishments, and endurance. Following Kalen might be perilous, yet there was a strange pull in the way the Lord moved, calm, assured, and impossible to ignore. Slowly, he fell in step behind him, listening to the subtle sounds of the courtyard, the castle doors, the distant wind. Inside the castle, the air was warmer but heavy with candle smoke. Servants hurried past, eyes down, murmuring among themselves. Kalen did not speak as they walked, but his presence filled every corner. Arindor felt it, like a weight pressing against him, testing him, daring him to break his silence. They reached a chamber high above the castle's stone halls. Kalen stopped, turning to face the Omega. The firelight danced across his face, casting shadows that seemed almost alive. "You are not like the others," he said quietly. "You do not scream. You do not bow completely. I cannot tell if you are fearless or foolish." Arindor met him calmly, his pale eyes unseeing but unflinching. "Perhaps a little of both," he said, "or neither. Perhaps I simply know the difference between pain and surrender." Kalen studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read the unspoken truth behind those words. In the silence, the fire crackled, and the shadows seemed to listen. Then, without another word, Kalen turned and left the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Arindor remained, listening to the fading echoes of Kalen's boots. His heart, so accustomed to fear, felt something unfamiliar. Curiosity, maybe even hope. Perhaps this Alpha was more than the tormentor he feared. Perhaps he was the key to understanding his own fate. Later, as he lay on the thin mattress of straw provided to him, Arindor traced the mark on his shoulder with careful fingers. It burned lightly, a reminder of what had been done to him. And yet beneath the heat he felt a strange pulse, a hint of something powerful, something alive. The curse was not only a punishment, it seemed, but also a challenge, a test. Outside the window, the wind moaned through the stone towers. Somewhere deep in the castle, Kalen watched from the shadows, thinking of the blind Omega who bore the fire without sound. His thoughts were tangled, frustration, fascination, and an inexplicable pull toward the man who seemed untouchable and yet fragile. As the night deepened, Arindor closed his eyes, allowing himself to listen to the castle, the wind, and the faint heartbeat of the world around him. He did not yet understand Kalen, the curse, or the power that simmered within him, but he knew one thing: he would endure. He would survive. And in that survival, perhaps he would find a way to turn the curse into strength, the pain into purpose. And Kalen, standing silently in the hall outside, knew one thing as well: this Omega was unlike any he had ever encountered. Something about him demanded attention, respect, and perhaps even change. The night stretched on, thick with shadows and quiet anticipation, and somewhere in the distance the forest whispered, as if it knew that this was only the beginning. Arindor, the blind pup branded cursed, had taken the first step into a world of pain, power, and possibility. And Lord Kalen, the storm of the north, had just taken notice. The castle was quiet, but not empty. Shadows lingered in every corridor, stretching long and thin under the flickering candlelight. Arindor sat on the straw mattress in his small chamber, the heat from the branding iron still a dull ache on his shoulder. His fingers traced the faint mark, feeling the memory of fire pressed into his flesh. It was not a wound that bled, but a weight, a symbol of something more, a curse perhaps, or a gift in disguise. He had learned long ago to hear more than words. to read the intentions of men through their footsteps, the way their breaths shifted or the way their eyes lingered even when he could not see. And now, with Kaelin watching him, Arendor sensed a storm brewing. Not outside, but within the walls of the castle, within the Lord himself. Kaelin did not appear that night. He had left the door slightly ajar, and in his absence the shadows seemed to press closer, whispering faintly through the stone. Arendor listened to them as he lay down, feeling the pulse of the castle, the rhythm of unseen life, and the quiet, lingering curiosity of the Alpha who had noticed him. Morning came slow. The first rays of sunlight crept over the towers, touching the stones with a pale gold. Servants brought food, but none dared speak more than a few words. Kaelin had left instructions. Arendor was to remain in his chamber until summoned. By mid-morning, Kaelin appeared. His boots made no sound on the stone floor, but Arendor felt the weight of him before he even knew he had entered. The Lord stood tall, framed by the doorway, his gray eyes scanning the small room as though it were a map of secrets yet to be uncovered. "Come," Kaelin said, voice low, carrying authority but also a hint of curiosity. "We have much to discuss." Arendor rose slowly, careful with the fire still lingering in his shoulder. He followed Kaelin down winding corridors, through halls lined with tapestries depicting battles long past, kings and queens in golden armor, and creatures that seemed almost alive in the flickering light. The castle, like the Alpha himself, was a place of history, power, and hidden dangers. They reached a large chamber at the heart of the castle. A fire burned in the hearth, casting shadows that danced across the high walls. Kaelin gestured toward a seat near the fire. "Sit," he commanded. Arendor did, and Kaelin remained standing, hands clasped behind his back. The room was silent except for the crackle of flames and the faint wind moaning outside the window. "You are not like the others," Kaelin said finally. His tone was measured, but there was a weight behind his words, an acknowledgement of something he did not often admit. "Others would cry, they would beg, they would curse the world and break under the fire. You do not." Arendor tilted his head slightly, the pale eyes unseeing yet alert. "Pain is temporary," he said softly. "It does not define the man who bears it. It is what he does after the fire that matters." Kaelin's lips pressed into a thin line. He had not expected words like that. Most would tremble or submit. Most would bow and whimper. But this Omega, he endured. He measured. He understood, and in that, Kaelin saw a spark, a flame he could neither control nor ignore. "Interesting," Kaelin said, voice low, almost to himself. "Perhaps you are not cursed in the way the world thinks. Perhaps your curse is something else." Arendor's fingers traced the edge of the fire's warmth. "Perhaps," he said. "Or perhaps it is exactly what it seems. Only time can tell." The Alpha studied him, stepping closer so that his shadow fell across Arendor's face. "You feel the world differently," Kaelin observed. "You listen to it. You sense it. You hear truths others cannot." "That is not strength," Arendor replied quietly. "It is survival. One learns to notice what others ignore when the world wishes to destroy him." Kaelin's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in thought. He had spent years ruling, controlling, demanding obedience, yet here was someone who did not obey, yet did not rebel. Someone who bore pain silently, who did not cry or plead, someone who mattered. "You will remain under my watch," Kaelin said finally. "Not as a prisoner, but as a witness, perhaps as a guide. The kingdom is full of shadows, Arendor, and I suspect you will see more of them than I can." Arendor inclined his head slightly. "I will do as you ask. But know this, my sight is not yours to command. I see as I must, and I will speak only when it matters." The Alpha studied him for a long moment, then turned sharply and left the chamber. Arendor remained seated, listening to the echoes of Kaelin's boots fading down the hall. A strange warmth stirred within him, not comfort, but anticipation. The Lord of the North was a storm, and storms could destroy or reveal. Perhaps he thought he would learn which. Days passed in quiet tension. Arendor performed tasks that were meant to humiliate, carrying messages, cleaning stables, arranging rooms for nobles, and each time Kaelin observed, not openly, but silently, always present, always weighing, always testing. The Omega began to notice patterns in the Lord's behavior, subtle movements, quiet sighs, the way Kaelin's hand twitched when anger or frustration brushed close. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, Kaelin summoned Arendor to the castle's balcony. The wind blew fiercely across the stone ledge, tugging at robes and hair. Below, the kingdom sprawled like a patchwork of forests, fields, and winding rivers. "You have been here a week," Kaelin said, "and yet I know almost nothing of you. You carry the mark, the curse, but who are you, truly?" Arendor leaned lightly against the railing, feeling the cold wind on his face. "I am someone who has endured," he said. "Someone who has survived when others could not. That is all the world needs me to be, for now." Kaelin's gaze hardened, not in anger, but in thought. "And yet, there is more. I see it in the way you stand, the way you endure. You do not fear me, and yet you do not challenge me openly. That balance, it unnerves me." Arendor's lips curved faintly. "Perhaps it should. The world is not as simple as power and obedience. You will learn that, Lord Kaelin, if you have the patience to watch." Kaelin did not respond immediately. He only looked out over the kingdom, the fire of the sunset, lighting his stern features. The wind whistled, carrying whispers of the forest that bordered the north. Strange stories of spirits and curses lingered there, and Arendor had heard them in his dreams, a faint echo of something alive and ancient. "You hear it too, do you not?" Kaelin asked finally, voice barely audible over the wind. "The whispers in the night, the shadows that move where no one walks." The forest watches, the cursed hear it. But few know how to listen without fear. Kaelin's eyes met his. In that gaze was a mixture of disbelief, fascination, and something else, something he did not fully understand. "Perhaps you are more than cursed, Arendor," he murmured. "Perhaps you are, destined for something else entirely." The Omega said nothing, but he felt the weight of the words, heavy as the iron of his branding. He knew that destiny was often cruel, wrapped in fire and shadow, and yet for the first time he sensed a possibility, that he might survive not only the curse, but the storms it would bring. Night fell, and the castle settled into silence. Arendor lay on the straw mattress again, tracing the mark on his shoulder by candlelight. The fire's warmth was comforting, a reminder that pain could exist alongside life. Beyond the walls, the forest stirred, whispers growing louder in his dreams. A presence called to him, distant yet insistent, hinting that his curse was only the beginning of something far larger than he imagined. Meanwhile, Kaelin watched from the shadows outside the chamber door. He had seen many things in his life: warriors who broke under pressure, nobles who faltered under fear, enemies who bent before him, but never an Omega like Arendor. Silent, enduring, and yet alive with a spark that drew him in despite himself. As the wind howled through the towers and the moonlight spilled across the courtyard, both men lay awake in separate chambers connected by an invisible thread of fate and curiosity. Neither spoke, yet both understood that the bond had begun. It was fragile, unformed, yet unbreakable in its potential. And somewhere in the distance the forest whispered again, "The mark shall endure, but the storm will come. And when it does, none shall remain unchanged." Arendor awoke to a strange light filtering through his window. It was softer than the sunlight of the morning, pale and silver, as if the moon had lingered past dawn. The air in his chamber smelled faintly of earth and moss, though he knew the forest lay far beyond the castle walls. Yet something inside him stirred, a pull, gentle but impossible to ignore. He rose from the straw mattress, his shoulders still tender from the branding, and moved toward the window. The castle lay silent, but the wind carried whispers he had heard before in dreams. Soft voices weaving through the trees and across the stones. Erindor had learned to listen, and tonight the voice was clear. It called him by name. He made no sound as he moved. The guards were away in the outer halls, and Kalen had retired to his own chambers, silent as a shadow. Erindor wrapped his cloak around his shoulders, the fabric brushing against the mark on his skin. With careful steps, he left the room, following the whispering wind toward the forest that bordered the northern walls. The moon guided him as he slipped past the guards at the edge of the castle grounds. His bare feet barely touched the earth, yet every stone, every branch beneath him seemed to guide his steps. He could not see, but he knew where he was going. It was as though the curse that branded him had opened a new sense, a sight beyond sight, a knowing beyond knowing. Deeper into the forest he walked, past the trees that seemed impossibly tall, their branches entwined like the fingers of giants. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying fragments of words and melodies he had never heard before. They were not songs of joy nor cries of pain. They were memories, echoes of old magic, and they spoke to him. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time stretched oddly here, and Erindor came to a clearing bathed in silver light. At its center stood a shrine, ancient and carved from stone, black as midnight, yet glowing faintly from within. Symbols he did not recognize were etched into its surface, pulsing like a heartbeat. Erindor approached slowly, kneeling before the shrine. He placed his hands on the smooth stone and felt warmth radiate through his palms, a warmth unlike fire or sunlight, soft and alive. And then he heard it clearly, the voice of the forest, calling to him not as a curse, but as a guide.
"You were branded, Omega," it whispered.
But your sight is more than eyes. You see what others cannot. The mark is not punishment, it is choice. You may endure, or you may awaken. Erindor's fingers traced the glowing symbols. He understood suddenly that the curse he had believed was meant to break him was instead meant to test him, to teach him, to awaken something deep within. He was no longer merely a victim of circumstance. He was part of a larger design. The rustle of leaves startled him. "Who's there?" he called softly. The wind answered, carrying no human voice, only the echo of something alive in the shadows. He could feel it, sense it, a presence watching, waiting, judging. Before he could move further, Kalen emerged from the shadows of the forest, silent as a shadow himself. His eyes were wide, a rare softness mingled with surprise. "Erindor," he said, almost a whisper. "What are you doing out here? The forest is dangerous, even for those who can see." Erindor remained kneeling, calm and unafraid. "I am not here by accident," he said. "The forest called me. I think it has something to show me about this mark, about the curse." Kalen stepped closer, boots pressing softly on the mossy ground. "You could have been lost. Or worse. The shadows here, they are older than the castle, older than the kings and queens of the north. They do not forgive easily." Erindor tilted his head, sensing rather than seeing Kalen's emotions. There was concern, yes, but also fascination, and perhaps fear. Not of the forest, but of him. "I am no longer only the branded pup," he said quietly. "I have begun to understand what the curse truly means." Kalen's jaw tightened. "You speak as if you know already. And yet, I do not know whether to stop you or to follow." Erindor stood slowly, the mark on his shoulder faintly glowing under the silver light. "Then follow," he said simply. "If you wish to understand, step into the truth with me." The Alpha hesitated, his eyes scanning the shadows, sensing the forest's silent power pressing against them. Then, as if drawn by something stronger than reason, Kalen stepped forward, leaving fear behind. Together they approached the shrine. The air grew heavier near the stone, charged with ancient magic. Symbols on the surface pulsed brighter as they drew near. And Erindor placed his hands upon them once more. He could feel threads of energy weaving through him, connecting his mind, his spirit, and even the pain of the branding into something coherent, something alive. Kalen's hand hovered above the stone, uncertain, hesitant, yet compelled.
It's alive, he whispered.
What is this place? Arendor felt the pulse of the shrine in his chest, a rhythm that mirrored his own heartbeat. It is the heart of the curse, he said softly. But it is not death. It is choice. It shows the truth in those who dare to see it. Kalen's gaze met his, a storm of curiosity and fear, and something unspoken, lingering in the gray depths. And if I see the truth? He asked. Will it change me? Arendor's lips curved slightly. Truth changes everyone, eventually. You may resist it, or you may let it guide you. A sudden gust of wind rattled the trees and shadows shifted unnaturally around them. The shrine's light intensified, bathing both men in silver brilliance. Images flickered before Arendor's mind, visions of kings and queens, of battles and betrayals, of darkness and light intertwined, and in the midst of it a faint vision of himself, marked, blind yet powerful, walking beside Kalen, their fates intertwined. Kalen stepped closer instinctively, sensing the bond forming not just from proximity, but from shared experience. "Why am I here?" he asked. "Why am I drawn to this?" "You are part of it," Arendor said. "The curse does not choose lightly. You may think it is my burden alone, but your destiny is tied to mine. One of us must bear the truth fully, or it may consume us both." Kylan's brow furrowed. He had seen many curses, many threats, and yet none had ever reached into his soul like this. The forest pulsed around them, alive with quiet power, and for the first time, Kalen felt the weight of something older than kingdoms, older than crowns, a responsibility, yes, but also the stirrings of change he could not yet name. Arendor placed a hand gently on Kalen's arm. "Do not fear the bond," he said. "It is not a chain. It is a bridge, but it will test you. And it will demand more than courage. It will demand honesty, even with yourself." Kalen looked at him, the firelight in his eyes replaced by the silver of the shrine's glow. "And if I fail, then we fall together," Arendor replied simply. "But perhaps," he added softly, "we will rise together instead." The wind swirled suddenly, stronger now, carrying a voice neither male nor female, human nor beast. It whispered of trials yet to come, of choices that could shape not only their lives but the fate of the kingdom. Arendor felt the pulse of the curse intensify on his shoulder, the mark warming as if alive. He realized fully now. The curse was not just his pain. It was power, and Kalen's presence was part of unlocking it. Kalen stepped back slightly, though he did not leave. "You are unlike any man I have met," he said quietly. "And yet I am not afraid of you. Only intrigued. Perhaps even responsible." Arendor studied him, sensing the words unspoken. The Alpha's walls were strong, built of pride and command. But here in the heart of the forest those walls trembled, not with fear, but with the possibility of something more. Trust, perhaps. Connection. And maybe even redemption. As the silver light faded and the first hints of dawn brushed the forest floor, both men stood silently before the shrine, bound not by chains but by the shared understanding of power, choice, and destiny. Neither spoke, yet both knew that the path forward would test them in ways the castle walls never could. The forest whispered again, "The blind shall see. The branded shall awaken, and together they shall face the storm that comes." Arendor and Kalen turned toward the deeper woods, each step carrying the weight of the past, the fire of the present, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The curse had shown its heart, but the trial was only beginning. The wind tore through the forest with a force that shook the trees. Arendor's cloak whipped around him, but he did not flinch. The mark on his shoulder burned brightly, warm and alive, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. He could feel the curse reaching its peak, a force that had been building since the day he was branded. Kalen moved beside him, silent and steady. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sword, though he did not raise it yet. His gray eyes scanned the shadows, every leaf, every branch, every movement in the silver-drenched woods. He had faced armies and storms, treachery and death, but nothing had ever unsettled him as much as the forest around Arendor now.
They are coming, Arendor said quietly. The shadows that have watched since the beginning.
The curse. It will test us. Kalen nodded, tension in his shoulders. Then we face it together. For a long moment, the forest was silent except for the wind and the pulse of Arendor's mark.
Then it shifted.
A darkness deeper than night itself began to coil between the trees. It moved like a living creature, yet it was no beast he had seen. It radiated cold, and every instinct in Kalen screamed danger. Arendor stepped forward, bare feet on mossy ground, letting the shadows flow past him, almost as if he were part of the forest now. "Do not fear it," he said to Kylan. "It will try to divide us. Fear weakens the heart. Trust strengthens it." Kalen's jaw tightened. Trust had never come easily to him, but he had learned to watch this blind Omega, to see strength where others saw weakness. He stepped closer, letting Arendor guide him toward the clearing where the shrine pulsed with silver light. The shadow surged suddenly, taking shape, a massive form, indistinct yet powerful, swirling like smoke, yet solid. It hissed and whispered, voices layered and echoing, calling out secrets and fears. Kalen's hand went to the sword instinctively, but he paused, seeing Arendor raise his palm to the darkness. "Stop," Arendor said, voice steady and commanding. "It is not a creature to fight with steel. It is the test. Face it with truth, or it will destroy you." Kalen hesitated. The Alpha had always relied on force, on dominance, on command. And yet here was a choice to face something with openness instead of blades. He felt the weight of centuries in the forest, the whispers of kings long gone, and the pulse of power flowing through Arendor. The shadow lunged, and Arendor did not move. His hand stayed raised, the mark glowing bright, as if the curse itself had become a shield. The darkness collided with him, and he did not scream, flinch, or resist. He felt it, not as pain, but as understanding. Every fear, every doubt, every ounce of survival instinct became clarity. Kalen watched, unable to look away. And then he realized the shadow was not only attacking Arendor, it was testing him as well. Kalen's mind raced through every choice he had ever made. Pride, cruelty, solitude, and command had been his armor. But armor would not work here. Only honesty, only courage, only trust in the Omega beside him could see them through. He took a step forward, closing the distance, placing his hand lightly on Arendor's shoulder. The moment their skin touched, a surge of energy passed between them. Kalen felt fear, guilt, and sorrow release from his chest. He felt Arendor's courage, calm and unbroken, flow into him. The Alpha had always believed in control, but now he believed in partnership. The shadow recoiled, hissing, swirling faster, trying to separate them. But Arendor and Kalen did not break their connection. Their hands remained lightly touching. Their hearts synchronized, uniting strength and endurance. The darkness shrieked, a sound that echoed through the forest and rattled the leaves, yet it began to fade, dissolving like mist under sunlight. Arendor stepped forward, guiding the dissipating shadows toward the shrine. "The curse is not only mine," he said. "It belongs to those who are willing to face it with truth. Only together can it be tamed." Kalen looked at him, seeing for the first time not just the Omega-branded cursed, but a man of power, courage, and vision. You were never just surviving," he said softly. "You were becoming something more." "Yes," Arendor replied. "And now you are becoming something more too." They stood before the shrine, silver light bathing them, and the forest seemed to sigh, a deep, gentle sound, as though approving, as though releasing its long-held tension. The curse had reached its heart, tested its bond, and yielded to those who were worthy. Kalen lowered his hand from Arendor's shoulder, though neither stepped away. Silence stretched between them, comfortable and potent. "I have been alone too long," Kalen admitted, voice low, almost a confession. "And I have believed power comes from command and fear. I see now, it comes from courage, trust, and connection. You have taught me that, Erindor? Erindor smiled faintly, a soft light in his pale face. And you have taught me that strength does not mean isolation. Even the cursed must sometimes rely on another. The forest whispered again, softly this time, carrying words of old magic and promise. The curse was no longer a burden. It was a bond, a shared destiny, and a reminder that even in darkness there was light. If one dared to see it, Kaelin's hand went to Erindor's once more, this time not to steady, but to walk beside him. Shall we return? He asked, voice gentle. The kingdom waits, and there are things that still require attention.
Erindor nodded. Yes.
But we walk together now, and whatever comes, we face it as one. As they left the clearing, the forest seemed to part for them. Trees bent slightly as though bowing. Shadows withdrew, and the whispers became gentle guidance instead of warning. The curse had transformed, just as they had, into something alive, protective, and guiding. Back at the castle, the kingdom remained unaware of the storm that had passed in the northern forest. Kaelin and Erindor returned silently, their bond unspoken yet absolute. Kaelin's guards saw only a quiet Alpha and a subdued Omega, but the air between them had changed, charged with understanding, respect, and an unspoken promise of partnership. In the following days, Erindor no longer performed tasks meant to humiliate. Kaelin allowed him freedom within the castle walls, trusting his judgment, and even seeking his counsel. Erindor in turn guided Kaelin in subtle ways, how to sense unrest, how to anticipate deception, how to lead with compassion as well as command. Together they became more than master and servant, more than Alpha and Omega. They became allies, partners in the truest sense. One evening, Kaelin stood on the balcony, looking out over the kingdom. Erindor approached, silent as always, but this time with no fear or hesitation. He placed a hand lightly on Kaelin's shoulder. You have changed, he said softly. Kaelin turned, meeting the pale eyes of the Omega who had endured fire, shadow, and curse. No, he replied. We have changed, together. The forest beyond the castle seemed to hum with approval, leaves rustling gently in the night breeze. Somewhere deep in the north, the whispers of the old magic faded, leaving behind only a promise that darkness and light, pain and endurance, fear and trust, had found balance once more. Kaelin and Erindor stood there, shoulder to shoulder, silent but connected. Neither needed words. The fire of the curse, the test of the shadows, and the trial of the bond had passed. They were no longer prisoner and lord, Omega and Alpha, curse and observer. They were two souls intertwined, each stronger for the other, each carrying a light that could not be extinguished. And somewhere in the distance the wind carried a whisper, soft and distant. The storm has passed, but the journey begins. Those who endure together shape the world. Erindor looked out over the horizon, feeling strength in every step, courage in every heartbeat, and a strange new sense of sight. The mark on his shoulder had faded from burning to warmth, a reminder not of pain, but of power and choice. Kaelin stood beside him, steady and calm, a silent promise in his eyes. He would never forget the lessons learned in the forest, the courage of the blind Omega, and the truth that power alone was not enough. Together they would face whatever storms came next. For the first time the kingdom knew peace, not the absence of danger, but the presence of strength, courage, and trust. And in that peace, Erindor and Kaelin found something far greater than either had ever expected: redemption, connection, and the quiet, enduring power of love forged in fire, shadow, and choice.